You're listening to the Second Look podcast, where we take a closer look at what we're learning each Sunday at Connection Church to help you grow in your walk with Christ. Here are your hosts, Pastor Joe Terreri and Pastor Dan DeRochers.
Welcome to The Second Look. My name is Dan.
And I'm Joe.
And we're here talking about freedom from apathy. And I was going to come up with a question to ask you, Joe, but didn't really feel like it.
Yeah, I don't really feel like doing this podcast.
No. All right. Well, this has been another episode.
Second Look. Who cares? Really, who cares about anything?
Joe, have you ever been doing something and just had this thought like, why am I doing this?
Yes.
I don't like this.
Yes.
What's an example of something that
Oh, gosh.
you've done that you're like, I actually don't like this?
I mean, most board games I play, I
Really?
end up, like, unless I'm winning, but most board games I play, at some point, I'm like, I don't really like this, and it's not really great. Or, when I'm
Helping somebody move. Is that what you were going to say?
Helping somebody move easily, pulling weeds. I'm like, these are just going to grow back.
They're definitely growing back.
Yeah. I like cutting my lawn, but I don't like pulling weeds. And you know what? I actually had this thought this morning. Like, I just paid to have my lawn or the beds in my house like mulched, and I know some people are thinking you can just
sleep in mulch.
Yeah, I know some people are thinking like you could have done that yourself, and I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to because I have apathy about it. But I just remember thinking like I paid $400 to get like all the beds at my house mulched, and then I just like walked by them and like there's weeds growing up. I'm like, yeah, they look good for 2 weeks.
Yes.
And then I asked myself the question, why did I do this? And then I literally think, would I have been okay if they just would have looked bad because they just look bad now? And I'm like, yep, next year I'm not doing that.
Yeah, that's why Alicia and I mulch about every 3 years.
Yeah, that's plenty.
Yeah,
that's plenty.
Yeah, because it looks good for 20 minutes.
Yeah, your kids run through it. They get mulch everywhere.
Yep.
And my mom was visiting us recently, and she actually bought us a special broom to sweep the mulch back into the beds because Ezra just keeps running through them. And so, yeah, it's just a waste of time.
We're talking about mulch on the Second Look podcast. This has reached a new low.
No, it's good.
No, but Joe, one of the...
I really enjoyed talking about Canada last week. Let's keep going.
One of the things that you mentioned yesterday was you prioritize what you are passionate about.
Yes.
Clearly not passionate about mulching.
No.
But there are things that we prioritize. And I do think there are times in our life where we arrive somewhere at our lives where we are prioritizing things that maybe if we were to design our life, we wouldn't say, oh yeah, I definitely want to put this thing first, but somehow as the sequence of events of our life unfold, we look at our lives and say, this isn't actually what I want.
Yeah.
How do we end up in that place? And maybe that's where midlife crises, come up.
Well, I think we have to be honest about the fact that none of us love every moment of our job. There's just realities about work where if you even just go back to Genesis 3, there is something about work that is good for us, but because of the reality of sin in the world, work has become toil. And every man and woman who's in the workforce or working at home or working on their flower beds at home, we all experience toil. So we do prioritize our work because that's just something that we need to do, and there's something good and godly about caring for our family. So I want to be careful that we say that work is a good and a godly thing, and yet it doesn't always bring fulfillment because it seems at times that the creation is working against us. Everyone experiences that. But then we just find ourselves kind of agreeing to, so here's what I think happens. We make commitments to things, and then they take up way more time than we think they're going to take. And, even in our own family recently, my wife and I last night, before we walked into the Get to Know You dinner, we were in the car chatting about our son who's really into basketball and he's pretty good at it, but just all of the time that takes. And I'm thinking about like you say yes to him being on this team, and then the next thing you know, it just takes hours and hours and hours of his life and
your life
and our life. And we were having this conversation just in our own family about priorities. And so I think that happens when we make commitments without realizing how long and how much time things are going to take. And then I think there's just things that we love to do. Like, some of us, like we like golf. And so, you end up committing your life to golf, and the next thing you know, you're using so much of your time and your weekends to get better at golf. And recreation is good, but it can actually become a passion that crowds out the things of God. And we may have leisure activities that we love, and it's really good to enjoy them, but at what point do they become an idol in our life? And that's taken place over the things of God. And so I just think we have to always be on guard about the fact that our time is precious, and we need to say, are we intentional with how we're spending our time? Because the point of my message yesterday was not everyone needs to spend 20 hours a week at church. That's not even close to what I was saying. It's really asking, is God first in your life?
Can God be first in your life even while you do have leisure activities or your kids are in sports? I mean, how do we prioritize God even among
our busy schedules?
Our busy schedule and what it's like living in suburban America.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to that. I think number one, I just think there's a moment of honesty that we all need to have with ourselves that goes something like this. What is actually first in my life right now? And I think sometimes parents and in particular and families just sort of like, hey, we have this thing that we love to do on the weekends, and since we paid so much money for it, we got to do it. And I would say, no, you don't got to do it. You actually can choose, you can make a different choice. And so I think that, and then I think there's times where it's like, we want to love our kids, we want to see them get involved in things, but I would also say that none of us have to bow our knee to the pressure to be going 1,000 miles an hour in our life. And so here's what I think the bottom line is are you too busy to be a follower of Jesus? Are you too busy to spend time with God? Are you too busy to prioritize the gathering of God's people? Are you too busy to be in community and give your life away in service and ministry and building other people up? If the answer to that is, I just don't have time to be a Christian, then you actually need to reprioritize your life. So I don't want to get into the specifics about different things because we all like different things. We all have different hobbies and passions. And I'm not down on golf, and I'm not down on having nice things, and I'm not down on, getting away for the weekend. But here's the bottom line. Is Jesus first in your life? And if you don't have time to make him first, you're too busy. But culture will never tell you that.
Right.
And and then like I've even seen this, like parents are like, oh, we've made a commitment to this team. And it's like, no, I thought you made a commitment to Jesus. Like I thought he would be first. And so, listen, I want to be so clear. These are issues we walk through in our own family. Yeah. So I don't say that with any judgment. I say that as someone who's like, yeah, this is very real stuff that we're trying to figure out to say, hey, even in the Terrari family, Jesus Christ needs to be first.
In the story in Haggai that we were reading yesterday, the Israelites' life was hard.
Yeah.
It was tough. Can you talk a little bit about, and it was tough because God was making it tough.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about God's discipline?
Sure. I think that the New Testament passage that really tells us about God's heart and discipline is Hebrews 12. So once you get down to verse 4, verse 5 of Hebrews 12, the author of Hebrews begins to describe why God disciplines us. And there's a few reasons. God's discipline comes into our life so that we will be trained by it. So it's not punishment. Punishment is payback. Discipline is meant to teach. And so God's discipline is never paying us back. It's not like, I'm going to get you for not putting me first. It is, I'm going to allow hardship into your life in order to draw you back into a place of peace. If you read Hebrews 12, starting in verse 5, all the way to, I think, verse 10 or 11, you will see God's heart. You'll see that God brings discipline into our life so that there might be a harvest of righteousness and a harvest of peace. And so we need to know when we're going our own way, God will allow the hard things into our life. I want to be really clear, not every hard thing is God's discipline. Sometimes life is just hard because we live in a broken world. But we also have to leave open the possibility that the hard things in our life are God's discipline, drawing us back to himself. And the author of Hebrews makes the argument that like just like our earthly fathers disciplined us for our good, how much more does our perfect Father in heaven discipline us for our good? So at the heart of God's discipline, and this is so key, and this is what I think some of us who think we're smarter than God struggle with, at the heart of God's discipline is his love for us. And as a parent, I understand. I discipline my kids, not because I'm trying to pay them back because they did the wrong thing. I'm disciplining my kids because I love them and I want them to become whole people who are living in God's blessing.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned because we got somebody wrote in yesterday and asked us a question about, God was making the Israelites tough because of their messed up priorities. Does that mean that people have difficult lives because they don't put God first? And you just referenced it, and this person brought up even thinking about people in third world countries.
Sure.
Right, who just suffer and have a tough time. And there are people who live in third world countries who put God first and still have difficult times. And there are people that live very comfortable lives who couldn't be further from God, right? So what would you respond to that?
So I think there's two texts that come to mind. The first, I would say this. I think we assume that people who have less than us are less happy than us. And Dan, you've been to the third world. It doesn't seem like that's the case.
Yeah.
It actually could be that people who have less than us are happier. So we look at people who live in the third world who really love Jesus and be like, oh my gosh, their lives are so hard and ours are so great. And it could be that our wealth is actually doing more to crowd out God's joy than their wealth is. So let's not assume that their lives are going worse than ours. Sometimes our wealth blocks our vision of God.
Yeah, that's good.
And they don't have that idol to deal with. So let's not assume that. The second thing I would say is we live in a broken world. And there is injustice, there is inequity, there are realities, there's poor governments, there's countries that have experienced natural disasters that we haven't experienced. And I'm not going to try to explain in the mystery of God how that all works together. Like, I don't know. But I wouldn't assume that people who are in economic difficulty in the third world are experiencing God's discipline. That wasn't the point. Like, in this very specific moment in the history of Israel, economic conditions were poor because God allowed them to be. And so God blessed his people. And here's the other thing I would say, and I think as Christians who put God first, maybe in a country like ours who are going through tough economic times, going through inflation, here's what I think. God's economy and a nation's economy are not always connected.
That's good.
Meaning that God's people can experience blessing when the rest of the culture is not, as they're putting him first. Now, of course, the brokenness of the world touches our lives, but I want to encourage people that you don't need to look at the stock market and read the news to decide if you're going to experience God's blessing. Here's what you need to do. You need to put God first. Put God first. But we also need to balance that. Sometimes we put God first, especially with our finances, and we still go through tough times. So we need to be careful that we're not talking in absolutes like this always happens. But the general principle we see in Scripture is put God first, experience his blessings. And we don't want to overreact to the prosperity gospel, Dan. Because sometimes we do that. It's like, well, we don't want to say that if you give, God's going to make you rich. That's not in the Bible. But here's what is super clear. As we put God first, we experience his blessings. I've experienced that in my life. I'm not a rich man, but God's always cared for us. Our needs are always met. We've been a one-income family for much of our married life, and God has cared for us because we've put him first. Does that mean we have everything we want? No. Does it mean, do we see God's hand of provision in our life? Yes. So there's a lot of nuance here. But then here's the other thing I want to bring out is, I think it's Psalm 73. The psalmist, I think it's Asaph, asked the question essentially, why do the wicked prosper?
That's good.
And I think that's a question I've asked in my life. Like, why are there people who have no regard for God, who get to, live at the beach and have a butler and drive a G-Wagon, and it just seems like their lives are awesome and every day's a party, and they don't care about God at all, and their life is all about wealth, fun, and pleasure. And it's like, well, I wish my life could have more of that. And the psalmist said, he goes, I tried to understand all this until I went to the house of the Lord and I understood their destiny. And as God's people, we need to not look at life with such temporary lenses. We need to have an eternal perspective. Like, death And I say this in honor of Tim Keller, who passed away this last week, one of my spiritual heroes. Tim Keller used to say, death will only make you better. And so as God's people, no matter what we experience in this life, whether it's abundance or scarcity, our hope in eternal life, our hope in what Jesus Christ offers, gives us just tremendous ability to stare down tough times and say, better days are always ahead of us when we love Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And we have to hold all these things in tension. And that takes some nuance and some faith and some understanding of what God's word actually says.
Yeah. So how can we do some introspection and even maybe for our family, familial introspection to begin to discern whether or not, and you said we know if we're putting God first, but what are some maybe markers that we could kind of test against to see if we're putting God first, or to at least test our own hearts?
Well, I think my favorite thing is a guy came up to me after church yesterday after the 11:30 service. And he said his whole family was there with him. And I love this guy. I've known him for a little bit. Great guy. They're newer to our church. And he just said, he goes, man, that message really hit me hard today. He said, I'm going home and we're going to have a family discussion around these 4 questions that we asked during the message. And I was like, what great leadership. Yeah. What an awesome idea. Like, why don't we actually ask the questions that came up as God was calling his people to put him first? So what are my excuses for not putting God first? What are my actual priorities? Am I fulfilled?
Yeah.
Will I put God back in first place? Like, it's not complicated.
Yeah.
Like, I love what God says. Here's how you put me first. Go on a hike, bring your saw, chop the trees down, bring the wood back, and get after it. And if you do that, I'm with you. I think that when we talk about introspection and we talk about actually putting God first, I really want this to be so clear. This is not rocket science.
Yeah.
You know what it is? It's a laying down of our idols. And you know why that's hard? Because your hands and my hands are clasped around them. And I went home after service yesterday. I sat down with Lucy. And then I sat down with Cheryl, and I just asked them, I said, what do you think my actual priorities? And they giggled a little bit. And they both said the same thing. And they both said the same thing to me. They said, oh, I definitely think you put Jesus first, and you really love running. And Lucy said the same thing to me. And it's like, yeah, like I have to watch because I'm on this big physical health kick. And I know some people listening to this podcast will love the fact that I'm admitting this publicly. There are times when, if I'm not careful, my health will become a bigger priority than my physical health could become a bigger priority than my spiritual health. Yeah. And they didn't say that's where I was, but they both mentioned you love running. And so I'm just saying, like, I'm doing this. I want everyone to know that, and I want us to do it. Yeah. That we would really ask ourselves the question and ask those around us, what am I putting first in my life?
So, things like, what are we spending our time on?
Yep.
Giving sacrificially.
Yes. That's a big one. You just can't lie about that.
Yeah.
Like, you just either are or you aren't. You're either giving sacrificially or you're not. Yeah. And that's one of the big things God says that needs to come first in our life.
Yeah.
Is the conversion of our wallets, which is always the last part of us to be converted.
Yeah.
According to Martin Luther.
Yeah. And these are things that we could know what to do.
Yep.
But the willingness to actually do them.
Yep.
That's a lagging indicator, I think, right? Knowing in your head what you need to do, believing in your heart what you need to do, but then the actual physical manifestation of those things, it can be a hard time. Yeah. Why is laying down our idols so hard?
Oh, because we love them. Because we think that's where the satisfaction is, because they're precious to us. I mean, listen, I know we all think we're a mystery. We're not mysterious at all. We are awesome at worshiping the creation instead of the creator. We are the Romans 1 people who suppress the truth and exchange the truth of God for a lie. Like, that's what we're all doing. We're all kind of saying, like, to the creator, we love the creation a little more than we love you, or a lot more. And so that's where the grace of Jesus Christ and the love of Jesus Christ needs to draw us back to the place where we're defeating those lies, saying that the satisfaction in my life comes from knowing and revering and walking and obeying Jesus.
One thing I noticed at the kind of as the application to the sermon, the application wasn't join a summer hangout,
Right.
join a dinner group, go through Grow Track. It wasn't get busier with
Nope.
things at Connection Church.
Nope.
Why is that?
Well, because I think a couple things. If we start, listen, I think it's wonderful to be in community. Like, if we start creating standards for people. Now, when I talk about giving, that's something God talks about. But I think the gospel, we need to be so careful, and I need to be careful in my preaching, and we need to be careful as a church. And I was thinking about this yesterday. We really need to be careful that we're not creating standards for people so that they believe if they hit our standards, they're good with God.
Yeah.
The gospel here's the gospel. Jesus Christ is the standard. We're all failing miserably. Put your faith in him and experience his rescue. But the next question is this. When I've experienced the saving work of Jesus Christ, and he is my Lord, what should my life look like?
Yeah.
Not in order to meet a standard for salvation, but to ask the question, what does my life need to look like if Jesus Christ is Lord of all? And that's the question we bring to the Lord in prayer. That's the question of priorities, because we could do all the things our church asks us to do and still not be in the kingdom, or still feel like that's where our righteousness is. I don't want to have and I don't think we have this, I don't have a full church of self-righteous people because they're checking the boxes that we're giving them to check. What I want everyone to be asking is in light of the fact that I'm a follower of Jesus, what do I owe Christ now? And the answer to that question is everything.
Do you think you could start a mulching the garden bed summer hangout?
Yeah,
Could
like
be a
people
summer
could just
hangout.
update it at my house, and I'm like, hey guys, come on over and we'll have some lemonade. And then I just have the bags of mulch like around, and they're like, this seems like we're just doing your yard
And you're
work.
handing out rakes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, here's a lemonade. Yeah.
No, I thought you guys wanted to get to know your pastor. This is great. And it'll have really good attendance week 1, week 2. It'll be attrition.
All right. Well, we're going to add it right to the group
Yes.
then, so you can.
Right after Mondays are rough.
I thought that was so funny.
That was the best.
Well, this has been another episode of The Second Look. You can catch this sermon and much more at our website, cometoconnect.com. Have a great week.